Morning light barely reached the edges of San Francisco Bay. A low fog rolled in from the water, wrapping the city in soft gray. From her apartment window on the 4th floor, Elena Vargas watched the boats drift like ghosts beneath the bridge. She sat completely still, a mug of cold tea beside her, her violin lying across her lap. The world around her made sounds she could only partly hear, the distant honk of traffic, the hum of a refrigerator, the muted seagull cries outside. But to her, everything arrived through a thin veil of cotton. The accident had left her hearing fractured, distorted, like a radio stuck between stations. Some tones slipped through. Others were gone forever. She used to live for sound. At 29, Elena had already played with 2 symphonies and won a national award for performance. When her bow touched the strings, she said she could see color in the notes. Critics called her the girl with the fire in her hands. Then came the night of the crash. Rain, headlights, the spin of metal, and a final chord of chaos that ended in silence. Her fiancé, Liam, hadn't survived. She had woken up in the hospital with bandages around her head and a world that suddenly felt underwater. Now, her days blended together in quiet repetition. She woke at sunrise, watched the fog, practiced scales she could barely trust, and avoided the world that once applauded her. On the coffee table sat a framed photo, her and Liam outside Davies Symphony Hall. His arm was draped over her shoulders. Both were smiling, eyes bright with youth and ambition. She turned it face down. Her phone buzzed, a message from the conservatory. Invitation, the Liam Carter Memorial Concert. We would be honored by your performance. Elena stared at it until the screen went dark. Then she deleted it without replying. A tremor of frustration passed through her fingers. She opened the violin case, looked at the instrument she had once loved more than life, and closed it again. The sound of the latch clicking shut echoed faintly, just enough for her to feel it more than hear it. Outside, a foghorn called from somewhere beyond the harbor. Its vibration reached through the walls, a low note she could feel in her chest. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard something again, not fully, but enough to remember what it was like when sound used to belong to her. But memory was cruel. It reminded her of everything she'd lost, the applause, the music, the voice she used to trust. She stood, poured the untouched tea down the sink, and whispered to the quiet apartment, "Not today." Then, almost as if to answer her, something faint and rhythmic drifted through the wall. She frowned, tilting her head. It wasn't the usual city noise. It was music, low bass, muffled piano, a pulse she could feel. She placed her palm flat against the wall. The vibration tingled through her hand, steady, alive, real. She closed her eyes and almost smiled. It was the first thing in a long time that didn't sound like loss. Next door, the world moved to a different rhythm. Malik Turner crouched beside a tangle of cables, a screwdriver between his teeth, as his 8-year-old son Noah bounced on the edge of the couch, tapping an offbeat rhythm against a set of small drum pads. "Dad, listen! It sounds like robots fighting in space," Noah said proudly. Malik chuckled under his breath. "Maybe the robots need a nap, champ." That's a lot of noise for one morning. The small recording studio, once a storage room, was a mess of half-repaired gear and dusty keyboards. On one wall hung a faded photo of Malik and his late wife, Serena, standing outside their old club. Back then, he'd been a sound engineer known for making ordinary singers sound like stars. Serena had been one of them, voice like honey, laugh like a melody. When she passed suddenly 3 years ago, Malik had packed up his microphones, sold his mixing console, and promised himself he'd never walk back into a studio again. But kids don't let you keep promises like that forever. One day, Noah had asked, "Dad, what did Mom sound like when she sang?" Malik had no answer. The next day, he rebuilt the studio, not for work, just for her memory, and for the boy who still believed music could fix anything. He powered on the old speakers. A faint hum filled the room. "All right, little man. Let's see what you got." Noah pressed a few keys on the keyboard, the kind of melody that stumbled more than it danced. Malik adjusted the gain, lowering the harsh notes. "There," he said softly. "Now it sounds like rain." The boy smiled. "Can we record it?" "Yeah, let's record it." Malik hit the red button. The speakers filled the apartment with a rough, uneven tune, half rhythm, half feeling. On the other side of the wall, Elena froze. The sound crept into her apartment like sunlight through blinds, muted but alive. She couldn't quite hear the melody, but she could feel it. Steady, warm, vibrating softly through the floor beneath her bare feet. At first, she wanted to be angry. She was used to silence, to control. But something about the sound soothed her, a reminder that the world still moved, even if she couldn't fully follow it. The bass pulsed through her ribs like a second heartbeat. The higher notes shimmered at the edges of her hearing. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. When the music stopped, the silence returned like a cold wave. The absence of sound made the air heavier, lonelier. Malik leaned back in his chair, stretching his tired shoulders. "That wasn't bad, huh?" Noah grinned. "Can we play it again?" "Tomorrow." "It's late." As he shut down the equipment, Malik thought of the thin wall between them and whoever lived next door. He'd never met her, but he sometimes heard faint movement, soft footsteps, the scrape of furniture. She was quiet, like someone living inside a memory. He hoped the sound didn't bother her, but if it did, maybe she'd understand. Sometimes music wasn't just for joy. It was for survival. That night, as the fog rolled in, Elena sat on her couch long after the last vibration faded. She touched her ear gently, almost expecting the sound to linger. It didn't. She picked up her violin case and set it beside her, unopened. Then, as if trying to hold on to something she didn't fully understand, she whispered, "Play it again?" Of course, there was no response. Just the steady hum of the city and the faint echo of something she could almost hear, something that didn't belong to her but somehow reached her anyway. It wasn't until later, lying in bed, that she realized the strangest thing. For the first time in months, she hadn't cried herself to sleep. By the third night, the music had become a pattern, soft at first, then swelling into something fuller, more confident. It no longer irritated Elena. It made her restless. She found herself waiting for it, fingers unconsciously tracing the shape of invisible strings against her knee. The vibrations came like a heartbeat through the walls, rhythmic and alive, until, suddenly, it stopped. The quiet that followed was unbearable. She stood up and crossed to her door before she could change her mind. Her heart raced. She knocked 3 times, sharp, impatient. The door opened to reveal a man with warm brown eyes, a t-shirt smeared with solder dust, and a look of startled politeness. "Hey," he said, blinking. "Can I help you?" Elena hesitated. For weeks, she had rehearsed being invisible, and now she didn't know what to say. I live next door. The music travels." From behind him, a small voice chimed in. "Hi, I'm Noah!" An 8-year-old boy appeared from behind the man's leg, beaming with an innocence that could melt anyone's frustration. He wore a superhero shirt 2 sizes too big and had ink stains on his fingers. Elena's tone softened without her meaning it to. "Hello, Noah." Malik rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry about the noise. We've been experimenting. The walls here aren't exactly soundproof." "It's fine," she replied quickly, though her pulse hadn't slowed. Maybe after 10? "Deal," he said, smiling. "I'm Malik, by the way." "Elena." "Well, Elena," he said, "if you ever want to stop by and tell us how terrible our mixes sound, you're welcome. We make tea, too." She almost smiled, but only almost. "I'll keep that in mind." She turned to leave, but the boy's voice stopped her. "Do you play music?" "You have music eyes." Elena froze. "Music eyes?" "Yeah," Noah said confidently. "Mom used to say people who really love sound have it in their eyes. Like they hear stuff even when it's quiet." Malik's gentle warning tone followed. "Noah," but Elena shook her head, forcing a smile. "That's a nice thought." Back in her apartment, she stood with her ear pressed to the shared wall. She could faintly make out Malik's voice, low, patient, as he tucked Noah into bed. The words were muffled, but the cadence was unmistakable. A lullaby of fatherhood, steady and tender. Later that night, as she sat by the window, Elena thought of that boy's strange phrase. "Music eyes." It felt like a memory of who she used to be, before grief hollowed her out. She hadn't been called a musician in a long time. She'd stopped calling herself one, too. The next day, the music didn't come. The apartment stayed silent. At first, she welcomed it. Finally, peace. But as the hours passed, the quiet grew heavy. Her tea cooled untouched. The air seemed too still, like a pause that had gone on too long. By evening, her own reflection in the window startled her. The tiredness in her face, the dullness in her expression. It was as if she'd forgotten how to live. Her hand trembled as she reached for the violin case. She opened it, staring at the polished wood inside. Her fingers brushed the strings, tracing the familiar shape. The bow felt foreign, heavier than she remembered. She didn't play. She just held it until her arms ached, then placed it back gently. From the hallway, faint footsteps approached. A soft knock followed. When she opened the door, Malik stood there with 2 steaming mugs. "Peace offering," he said, smiling sheepishly. "Chamomile. And I promise, no music tonight." She blinked, surprised. "I didn't mean to sound rude earlier." "You didn't," he said. "You sounded tired." She accepted the mug. The warmth seeped into her palms. "I suppose I am." He nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "You know, sometimes tired means you've been quiet too long." She met his gaze, unsure how to respond. "Anyway," he said lightly, backing up, "we're right next door if you ever need help with anything, noise included." "Thank you," she said softly. When she closed the door, she realized her hands weren't shaking anymore. She sipped the tea slowly, letting the heat settle in her chest. That night, for the first time since the accident, she dreamed, not of silence, but of a melody she almost recognized. The next morning came with a drizzle that misted over the city. The streets gleamed silver under weak sunlight, and the fog moved in lazy ribbons over the bay. Elena had just finished boiling water for tea when there was a knock on her door. 2 quick taps, followed by 1 slow one. She froze for a second before answering. When she opened the door, she found Noah standing there, holding a crumpled piece of paper covered in bright, chaotic scribbles. Behind him stood Malik, trying, and failing, to look apologetic. "Hi, Miss Lenny," the boy chirped. "I made you something." Elena blinked. "Miss Lenny? That's what I call you," Noah explained with complete confidence. "It sounds friendlier than Elena," Malik sighed. He insisted on bringing it himself. She took the paper gently. It was a drawing, a stick figure woman holding a violin. Next to her stood a smaller stick figure with a keyboard. The two were surrounded by floating musical notes drawn in bright yellow crayon. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you," Noah beamed. "Dad says you're a musician. Want to see our studio?" Elena opened her mouth to decline, but Malik stepped in before she could. "Noah, Miss Elena probably has things to do." But the boy's pleading eyes were hard to ignore. "Please, just for a minute." "I promise it's cool." Elena hesitated. Her therapist had once told her to stop running from reminders of her old life. Maybe this was the kind of risk she needed to take. She nodded. "All right, just a minute." Noah practically bounced down the hall, leading the way into their apartment. The studio was nothing like the polished rooms she remembered from her symphony days. This one was alive. Messy cables coiled across the floor, papers stacked in uneven piles, the faint scent of coffee and lemon oil in the air. The walls were covered with foam panels, and one corner held an aging upright piano that looked like it had stories to tell. Malik moved aside a chair for her. "Careful of the wires. It's not much, but it's home." Her eyes landed on a strange metal square near the speakers. "What's that?" "That," Malik said, "is a vibration platform. It helps dancers and partially deaf students feel sound through their feet." He crouched, adjusting a small dial on the side. "Want to try?" Elena hesitated, her heart pounding. "I don't think it won't bite," he said, his voice warm but patient. Noah clapped his hands. "You should. It's like standing on a heartbeat." With a small laugh, Elena stepped onto the platform. Malik pressed a button. A deep note rumbled through the floor, subtle but powerful. The vibrations climbed her legs and settled in her chest, thrumming against her ribs like an echo. Her eyes widened. "I can feel it," Malik smiled. Music isn't just what we hear. It's what moves us. He adjusted the controls, layering soft piano chords over the low bass. Noah began to hum along, off-key but sincere. Something shifted inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Without thinking, she reached for the violin case slung over her shoulder. "Do you mind if I—" "Please," Malik said, stepping back. She lifted the violin to her chin. Her bow trembled as it touched the string. The first note wavered, thin and uncertain. Then another followed, stronger this time. Malik watched silently as she found the rhythm, her eyes closing as the vibrations synced with her playing. Noah tapped his foot beside her, matching her pace. For a few precious moments, the room felt whole. When the last note faded, she lowered her violin, breathing hard. "That was—" Malik began, searching for the word. "Ah, beautiful." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "It was messy." "Messy," he said, "is just honest music." Noah clapped his hands again, cheering. "You're amazing, Miss Lenny. Can we do it again?" Elena looked down at the boy, then at Malik. "Maybe sometime soon." Malik offered her a small smile. "Tea next time. I owe you a better welcome." Back in her apartment that night, Elena set her violin on the table. Her fingertips still buzzed faintly from the vibrations. She could almost hear the echo of what she'd played. When she closed her eyes, she saw Noah's grin and Malik's quiet approval. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like a broken musician trying to remember who she was. She felt like a person learning to live again, and that she thought might be music too. Rain tapped against the window that evening, a soft percussion that filled the gaps between silence and thought. Elena sat curled on her couch, the faint echo of the afternoon still lingering in her mind. Every so often, she'd glance at the violin resting on the table and feel a quiet ache, something like longing, something like fear. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. Finally, she picked it up. The notification wasn't from Malik or her therapist. It was from the San Francisco Conservatory. The message read, "Dear Ms. Vargas, we would be honored by your attendance, and if you're willing, your performance at the upcoming Liam Carter Memorial Concert." Her breath caught. The letters blurred. She hadn't heard his name written anywhere in months, her fiancé, her once and forever. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at the message. Then she deleted it. But the words didn't go away. They echoed inside her. Memorial concert, performance, Liam. She rose abruptly, pacing the room. Her hands trembled. The air felt thinner somehow. She grabbed her coat, desperate to breathe something other than the stale guilt of her apartment. By habit, her steps carried her next door. She hesitated at Malik's door for a long moment before knocking. He opened it within seconds, like he'd been nearby waiting. His expression softened instantly when he saw her face. "You okay?" "I just needed to get out of my head," she said. He stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the studio lights glowed dim gold. Noah was already asleep in his room, the faint sound of wind chimes drifting from the window. Malik handed her a mug of tea, ginger this time, sweet and sharp. They sat in silence for a while. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that made space for breathing. Finally, Malik said quietly, "You look like someone carrying something heavy." She stared into her mug. "They want me to perform again at his memorial." He nodded slowly. "Liam!" Her throat tightened. "You know, your name rings a bell. I used to follow the local music circuit." She laughed bitterly. "Then you probably saw the headlines. The golden couple of classical music, right? Until the night everything burned down." Malik didn't interrupt. He just waited. "I should have been driving slower," she continued. "I should have seen the car coming. He died and I lived. And I keep wondering if maybe the silence was the universe's way of punishing me." The words spilled out before she could stop them. Years of restraint breaking like a dam. When she finally fell quiet, Malik leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know," he said gently, "when my wife died, I stopped listening to music for almost 2 years. Couldn't do it. Every song hurt. Every sound felt wrong. I thought shutting it out meant I was protecting myself." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "But silence doesn't protect you. It just builds walls around your grief. She blinked hard. And how do you know when to let the sound back in? He smiled faintly. You don't. You just do it scared. A long pause stretched between them, soft, human, heavy with truth. Finally, Malik stood and walked over to his old soundboard. There's something I want to show you, he said. He pressed a button and a gentle melody filled the room, a recording, warm and grainy. A woman's voice floated through the speakers, singing a simple lullaby. Serena's voice, Elena froze. The tone was pure, fragile, yet full of love. That's her, Malik said quietly. The first song she ever recorded here. I couldn't listen to it for years. But when I did, it stopped hurting the same way. Elena's eyes filled. It's beautiful. She'd like you, Malik said softly. You both have that same stubborn grace. You keep standing even when it hurts. She laughed through the tears. I don't feel very graceful. Maybe not, he said. But you're still standing. The two sat there, the lullaby wrapping around them like a blanket. When the song ended, the silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. Before leaving, Elena glanced once more at the small photo on Malik's desk. A younger Malik with Serena, both smiling with the same light she now saw in his son's eyes. When she stepped back into her apartment, the letter from the conservatory still lay on her table. She didn't delete it this time. She folded it carefully, placed it inside her violin case, and closed the lid. She didn't know yet if she'd go. But for the first time, she didn't rule it out. That night, she played one soft note on her violin before bed. The sound wavered, imperfect but alive. And when she set the bow down, the silence that followed felt like something she could live with. The night of the memorial came faster than Elena expected. The city glowed gold beneath the late summer dusk, and the old concert hall stood like a cathedral of memory, polished glass, marble floors, and banners bearing Liam's name. Every step she took toward those doors felt like walking into a ghost. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the strap of her violin case. The air inside was thick with whispers and perfume and the faint metallic hum of anticipation. Familiar faces drifted past her, musicians, patrons, reporters, people who had once praised her brilliance, then whispered about her downfall. She wanted to turn around, to vanish into the crowd, but then she saw Malik standing near the back of the hall. He gave a small nod, not of encouragement, but of presence. The kind that said, "You're not alone. That was enough." Backstage, the lights were blinding. She could feel their heat more than she could hear the faint clatter of the orchestra tuning up. Someone handed her a microphone earpiece, but she barely registered it. All her focus narrowed to the violin in her hands, the familiar weight, the smooth wood worn by years of touch. "Miss Vargas," a stagehand whispered. "You're on in 5. She swallowed hard. "Thank you." Her heartbeat filled the silence where sound used to be. Each thump was a drum she could feel in her chest. Malik approached from behind, holding a small monitor pack. "I'll run sound from the booth," he said. "You'll feel some vibrations through the stage floor. Just trust it." She nodded, grateful for the steadiness in his voice. When the curtains parted, light flooded the stage. Elena stepped forward, blinking against the brightness. The hall stretched out before her, hundreds of faces, all blurred by tears, expectation, or pity. In the front row sat Noah, perched on his seat, feet swinging, a handmade sign in his hands. "Go, Miss Lenny." Elena almost laughed. Almost. She lifted the violin to her chin. Her bow hovered in midair. Then, slowly, she began to play. The first note was fragile, like glass about to crack. The next one steadied. Then another. Each vibration moved through her body, up her arm, across her collarbone, into her chest. She couldn't hear it clearly, but she could feel it. And that was enough to keep going. The song was one Liam used to love. Adagio for strings, a piece built entirely on emotion, each measure like a confession. Halfway through, her hearing began to slip again. The world dulled around her until all she could sense were the vibrations against her skin. Panic flared, but then she saw Noah in the front row, tapping his knee in rhythm. Malik behind the booth, nodding once, slow, certain. "Feel it," she told herself. She pressed her heel into the floor, feeling the faint hum of the bass from the piano. The vibrations spread upward, grounding her. Her fingers moved instinctively, bow gliding across the strings as muscle memory took over. The music became something deeper than sound. It became touch, motion, breath. She closed her eyes and let it carry her. The room disappeared. The audience vanished. All that existed was vibration. Life itself translated into motion. When the final note came, she let it linger, bow suspended in the air until the world seemed to exhale. Silence. For a long second, she thought she'd failed. Then suddenly, she saw it. The audience rising to their feet, hands clapping, faces alight with emotion. She couldn't hear it, but she could see it. She could feel it. The air itself trembled with their applause. A tear slid down her cheek. She bowed her head, whispering so quietly only she could feel the words. "We did it, Liam." Backstage, Malik was waiting. She stepped into his arms without hesitation. For once, she didn't apologize for the tears. "You played like you were breathing," he said softly. "That was more than music," she laughed weakly. "I didn't even hear half of it." "You didn't need to," he said. "Everyone else did." "And that's enough." Noah ran up, hugging her legs tightly. "You were amazing, Miss Lenny. You made people cry, even Dad." Malik smiled. "He's not wrong." Elena laughed through her tears, clutching Noah close. That night, as they walked out of the hall together, the city lights glimmered across the wet pavement. Elena tilted her head toward the sound of distant waves, faint and broken, but real. For the first time since the accident, the silence around her didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a resting place, the kind you find after a song ends, before the next begins, and for the first time, she was ready for whatever that next note would be. 2 weeks after the concert, the old studio next door looked completely different. The cables had been untangled, the floors cleared, and a hand-painted sign hung above the door in crooked blue letters. The Resonance Project. Inside, children sat in a semicircle tapping small drums, following the rhythm that pulsed through a vibration panel Malik had built from spare parts. Elena stood at the center, violin in hand, demonstrating how to feel the beat through their shoes. Noah sat cross-legged beside her, acting as self-appointed assistant conductor, waving a pencil like a baton. "Feel it here," Elena told the group, touching her heart. "If you can feel it, you can play it," a little girl giggled. "Even if I can't hear?" "Especially if you can't," Elena said, smiling. The class clapped, not perfectly in time, but perfectly alive. Malik watched from the control booth, arms folded, pride softening the lines on his face. When the lesson ended, the children scattered, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Noah stayed behind, rummaging in his backpack. "Wait, Miss Lenny, don't go yet!" He pulled out a small velvet pouch and handed it to her. Inside was a bracelet, thin leather, engraved with a jagged pattern that looked like sound waves. "What's this?" she asked. "It's your song," Noah said matter-of-factly. "Dad helped me record the waves when you played at the concert. Then we printed them on the leather." Elena traced the tiny grooves with her thumb. "It's beautiful." Malik joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. "He wanted you to have something you could feel even when it's quiet." Her throat tightened. "You two keep giving me things I don't know how to thank you for." Malik smiled gently. "Then don't thank us. Just keep showing up." They locked eyes for a moment. No tension, no hurry, just quiet understanding. Later, after cleaning up, the three of them walked to the small cafe down the street. The late afternoon sun spilled across the bay, turning everything gold. They sat outside with hot chocolate and coffee, watching the water shimmer. Noah talked nonstop about his future band. Malik listened with half an ear. The other half quietly focused on Elena. She seemed lighter now, still carrying grief, but differently, as if it had finally found somewhere to rest. When Noah ran inside for napkins, Malik leaned forward. "You know," he said, "I never told you what that performance did for me." Elena tilted her head. "You mixed the sound. I should be thanking you." He shook his head. "It wasn't the music. It was the way you played when the sound dropped out. Everyone else thought the speakers glitched, but I saw you keep going. No fear, just faith. I'd forgotten what that looked like. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city filled the space between them. Distant traffic, seagulls, someone strumming a guitar on the pier. Elena smiled softly. You helped me remember that silence doesn't have to mean loss. Sometimes it's just space, waiting to be filled. He nodded. Exactly. When Noah returned, grinning, chocolate on his nose, they all burst into laughter. Malik reached over and brushed it away with a napkin, shaking his head. You're impossible, kid. Noah leaned into Elena's arm. Miss Lenny, are you going to stay here forever? She hesitated. Forever's a long time. Then stay for a while, he said firmly. At least until my band's famous. Elena laughed. Deal. That evening, after walking Noah home, she lingered on the balcony outside Malik's apartment. The sky burned orange, fading into violet. From the street below came the faint sound of a street saxophone playing something slow and soulful. Malik stepped out beside her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. Peace offering for another long day. She took one. It's funny, she said after a sip. I used to think I'd never love sound again. Now it feels like everything hums, even the quiet. He set his mug down, leaning on the railing. Maybe that's what healing sounds like. She glanced at him. And what about you? Do you still hear her when you play? He nodded slowly. Sometimes, but it doesn't hurt anymore. Feels more like she's sitting in the mix with me, making sure I don't mess it up. Elena smiled. Then she'd be proud. You built something good here. He turned to face her fully. We built it. The breeze carried the scent of rain and sea salt. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined easily, naturally, as if the space between them had been waiting for this all along. For a long while, they just stood there, 2 people stitched together by loss, now finding rhythm in each other's silence. Below them, the city moved on, cars honking, laughter rising from the cafes, waves slapping gently against the pier. Elena looked out across the bay, the lights reflecting like stars caught in motion. You hear that? She asked quietly. Malik smiled. Every bit of it. And in that moment, for the first time, silence wasn't something she feared. It was simply the pause before the next beautiful sound.